Signs play a very significant role in for our purpose in everyday life. On the way to services today, you may have depended on a traffic sign to get you here safely, whether it was a stop sign, speed limit sign. I hate them, but no. But they do direct and guide our travels. A traffic sign can indicate a hazard ahead on the road that may be not readily apparent to the driver. We depend on signs to warn us of pending danger, don't we? I brought it with me, a visual example of that today. I think it shows up on your screen there. But this is a sign that you would find on an escalator at a shopping mall or at an airport. It is one of those signs that is probably the most ignored or overlooked. Escalators are very safe if you follow the caution or warning signs. But if not, they can become a person's worst nightmare. And I know that personally. I'm talking about something I know well. I was in the elevator escalator business for 37 years. And one of my jobs was to deal with the serious consequences when people ignored the caution or warning signs. If you'll notice on this sign, you'll notice a red circle here. In it, contained within that circle, is a shopping cart or any type of cart, and there's a red slash through it, meaning they should not be put or brought onto an escalator. Obviously, for obvious reasons, escalator, they're bad ideas to put on because they can get wedged between the step and the escalator, especially when the step levels out. They can get wedged, knock people down. I've seen mothers bringing their babies with strollers on the escalator, and the stroller tipping backwards. I've seen a lot of it because people ignore the signs, are too much in a hurry. There might be an elevator right to their right of them, but they would rather put this cart or this baby stroller. I've seen people go up them with wheelchairs. I've seen it all, and a lot of them flip over backwards, get hurt. We have to call 911. How about the hold handrail? The elderly are most prone to falling on escalators, just because they lose their balance quite quickly, and I have seen that happen many times. They fall backwards down the escalator and slice the back of their head or their back. The escalator steps are aluminum, and they are very sharp on the edges. How about attend children? When parents of small children ignore the warning signs, the consequences are sometimes fatal. I've witnessed parents in department stores allow their children to play on escalators. What's interesting, every time I would call out the children, if the parents said anywhere near, I know I'm going to get chewed out. The parents get very upset when you tell their children, these are not toys. I've been corrected many times, but I know what can happen. I've seen children sitting on steps of an escalator and come up to the top where the stationary comb plate goes through the step, and it sucks in their clothing, tears your skin off. It's nothing to mess with. I remember a child, well, I didn't witness it. I heard about the incident afterwards, but a child, they love to grab the handrail. As it spins, they love to just grab it and they'll let go. But on this particular situation, the young child, he must have been about 10, grabbed onto the handrail, and this time he didn't let go. And it started to drag him up the side of the escalator. The problem was he was not on the inside of the escalator where the steps are. He was actually on the outside edge of the escalator. And as it naturally didn't let go, and it pulled him up the incline till he got up towards the top, and he decides to let go. And he fell onto a glass jewelry case, and it killed him. It was fatal. All because parents weren't diligent, weren't cautious, didn't look at the warning signs, or maybe they saw them and just decided to ignore them. The consequences, as I said, can be very fatal. I watched a woman sitting nearby. Her 2-year-old child was walking and walked up the escalator and fell forward. And little hands went into the combs there. And it skinned, I saw it shortly afterwards, it peeled all the skin right off the fingers. There were just bones there. Again, these signs are in place for a good reason. Avoiding the sides is another warning. Stay away from the sides. Stand in the middle of the escalator. Again, they're a piece of moving equipment. The sides are stationary. The escalator steps are moving. So it naturally creates a gap. I have seen women with long dresses. The dress dragging gets caught in the step, in the gap there, and it took the skirt right off. People with long coats, I've gotten them out of escalators. Escalators love tennis shoes, especially that rubber grip on the end. I've collected up a lot of tennis shoe toe, where it's very rubbery, it'll grab. So escalators can be very safe if you pay attention to the warning signs, and it can have fatal consequences if not. And that goes with anything in life. So this is one example of how important warning signs are and what happens when you ignore them. So signs are used extensively to send strong messages. Some do it with some humor mixed in. A couple examples here. At a zoo, a sign said, "Do not stand, sit, climb, or lean on a fence. If you fall in, the animals could eat you and make them sick." How about the sign for operating machinery? "This machine has no brain. Use yours." That's a good sign. Good warning sign. How about the church parking lot? "No parking in the lot. Trespassers will be baptized." So anyhow, those are some signs, just examples. Again, warning signs indicate any potential hazard, obstacle, or condition requiring special attention in terms of consequences for actions should we choose to ignore the warning. My title of my sermon today is "The Warning Signs of Sin and Its Consequences." God provides ample warning throughout the Bible, from cover to cover, of the signs of sin and the consequences. Today, on this last day of Unleavened Bread, it is a commanded assembly. It is not to be taken lightly. We're commanded to be here. We're commanded to take an offering as we did. But we today will review some of these warning signs and the consequences when ignored. I want to share one more example with you of ignoring the warning signs. In the summer of 2008, 17-year-old Asa Ferguson, he was struck and decapitated by a Batman roller coaster at Six Flags over Georgia. I have been to that park several times, but Asa decided to ignore the warning signs. He was visiting the park with a group, actually a church group, when he lost his hat on a ride. Ignoring the danger signs that were clearly posted, he jumped 2 6-foot fences to retrieve that hat. What a horrible consequence to ignore the warning signs and jump over 2 fences for a cheap hat. He lost his life. A young man, this should never have happened. But this is a story of a horrible reminder of the consequences when we ignore the warning signs. And he jumped 2 fences that were there to protect him. And he chose to ignore those fences. He chose to ignore the warning signs, and it cost him his life. You know, the days of unleavened bread stand as a warning sign of sin and its consequences. That's why we're here today. We're here to learn more about sin and its consequences. But days of unleavened bread highlight the importance or the potential of hazards of sin, and the fact that special attention must not be ignored or the warning signs removed. The sin that so easily besets us, if ignored, those sins will have devastating consequences. So the days of unleavened bread act as a warning to all of us. You know, as we learn from the Passover, we learn about sin and its consequences that caused the death of God's beloved Son, Jesus Christ. No one understands sin and the consequences more than Jesus Christ and God the Father. He instituted the annual spring holy days as a means for us to focus on sin and the consequences if acted upon. Pictured by removing leaven from our homes, a type of sin. You know, why does God require this of us? Why? And it's obvious. He has a very deep and loving concern for us. He has a deep and loving concern for our overall well-being. The 7 days of unleavened bread have a deep and profound meaning. The symbols that remind us of sin have a very clear and precise meaning. And it's all by design from a loving parent. You know, we went through the physical act of putting leaven and leavened products out of our dwellings as a sign before God of our resolve to once again, this coming year, put sin out and to rededicate ourselves to God and to keeping that sin out. You know, as we ate the unleavened bread for 7 days, each time we bite into it, we're reminded of the fact that sin puffs up. Sin in our life wants to elevate us. That is a natural proclivity when sin enters in. It wants to puff us up, and if not dealt with, the consequences will befall us when sin is prevalent in our life. It is the government of God ultimately that is being resisted. Human nature wants to elevate itself above others for all the wrong reasons. We hear that a lot. We see that a lot, especially as ministers. The attitude, I should be in charge. I deserve to be recognized. It's a classic reaction when sin begins to permeate a person. When pride sets in, you ever notice how important feelings become? You know, an unleavened attitude is one of the true servant. What can I do to help? They have an unleavened person has a genuineness to help, to serve. It's not about a position for them. It's about an opportunity. Why an opportunity? Because it's motivated by love for their fellow human being. It is motivated by an outgoing concern for their brother, for their sister. It's not self-focused anymore. It's outgoing. Has a deep concern for others. Is that what our prayer life is about? I know some of you have a list of names you pray, people you pray about, and you rotate the names in there. As a deep loving concern for our brother and our sister. You're not worried about who's going to get the credit for serving. You just do it. That's your nature. It should be all of our nature to do that. But unfortunately, we get tangled up in the carnal human nature that wants to elevate us. 1 Peter 5:5-9. This is a warning sign. If we're puffed up, God gives a solution to the consequences to those, a solution to the consequences. But on the other hand, we got to choose to accept God's answer to our problem. 1 Peter 5:5-9. Submit to God, resist the devil. Likewise, you young people, submit yourselves to the elders. Yes, all of you submit to one another and be clothed with humility. For God resists the proud. The answers to our problems are right here if you struggle with pride. Clothe yourself with humility. But he says, but God gives grace to the humble. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. Solution: resist the devil. In what? In humility. That's how you resist him. He can't sink his teeth into someone who is humble. He's looking for those who put their head up in pride. You become perfect targets when you do that. You know, God's plan calls for the keeping of the Passover in the spring of the year, and contained within that Passover service is the ordinance of humility. The first thing God requires of us when we come before him in the spring of the year, he requires us to kneel down before our brother and sister and wash their feet. Do you think that was by accident? Do we think God didn't understand pride? Well, he got his face rubbed in it by Satan himself. In his face. This pride. Why do you think he put it together like he did? And what caused Satan to be kicked out of the throne area, away from God? You know, God said, I resist the proud. And he had to put Satan out. Huge warning sign, brethren. And the consequences can be fatal. I can't say that enough if we're not constantly repenting of pride. Pride will keep more of God's people from reaching the goal of the kingdom of God than any other sin. You know, if we don't learn the lesson of humility at Passover, we didn't learn it when we washed one another's feet, we're going to have a tough year ahead of us this coming year. It starts with addressing pride. You know, God's defenses go up, and he says he resists you if you have that element of pride. And I think about after doing the foot washing, if we don't get it by then, what good is the taking of the bread and wine? Does it? So it's important that we get a handle on the warning signs of pride. I want to talk about pride and how it progresses, if not repented of. Number one warning sign of pride. When it sets in, we will struggle with elevated emotions and feelings. Let me repeat that. We will begin to struggle with elevated emotions and feelings. How we feel becomes our mantra. Woe is me, the pity party. Someone did me wrong. Our focus begins to change. It's no longer outgoing. The focus now is on self. When God resists us, His Spirit leaves us. And now we're at the mercy of the five senses. That's why when pride sets in, we automatically will go to the five senses, because God's Spirit is not there. Number 2 warning, a sign of pride, we become easily offended. Again, the pity party. Someone said something I didn't like, shame on them. And because of elevated feelings and emotions, we begin automatically to struggle with relationships. I don't like that person. He said this, or I think they're like this. And you also have an elevated sense of self-righteousness. And you'll begin to find it difficult to forgive others. Let's go to Psalms 119. Actually, we won't turn there for sake of time. But it says, great peace have they which love thy law, and nothing will offend them. Again, why is it we become easily offended when pride sets in? We've lost our focus. It's not on God anymore. It's not on the brethren. It's on us. He says, what does he say? If you love God's law, if that is your focus, God and His law, then offenses cannot come. They will not. There's no room there for Satan to get in. You're so focused on God, you close the gap on Satan. Satan loves pride. Number 3, warning signs of pride. Offenses not forgiven will turn into a root of bitterness. This is the progression. I've seen it. We've all witnessed it. We've all witnessed it in our life. Bitterness is associated with anger and grudges. You can never let go. And I've known people who will carry grudges for 8-10 years. And when they approach you on it, they can tell you every detail that happened 15 years ago. How can that be, brethren? You can't let it go? Go to Hebrews 12, verse 15. This is a bigger problem than we think at the end of an age, and it's going to cause many, it says, as we'll read. Many are going to stumble, already have. Hebrews 12:15, looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God. Which one of us in here doesn't need God's grace? But God said it, be careful, because grace will leave you. If any root of bitterness springs up, it causes trouble, and by this many become defiled. It's not just a few. This is a growing problem, and it will continue with God's people if they do not heed the warning signs of sin. So root of bitterness will sit in. It does. It will. Many are going to be defiled by it. When the root of bitterness sets in, it means that the roots have taken shape. They surround the heart. The heart becomes calloused. God's Spirit then is choked out. And what's the next step? Next warning sign that always follows the root of bitterness is found in Matthew 24:12. Matthew 24, verse 12. It always follows. We don't repent of that root of bitterness. We continue to hold grudges. Matthew 24:12, and because iniquity shall abound, what's the next step? The love of many will wax cold. It is the love of God that we reflect, right, in our hearts. It's not man's love. Philadelphian love is a love that comes from God. Well, God says the love of many will wax cold. It is absolutely cold when you will not forgive others. Christ said, I forgave you when you were yet sinners. He didn't wait for you to come up and say, I'm sorry. He did it anyhow. That doesn't mean that there are consequences for sin. I'm not saying that. But we're to act like God. Yes, we obviously, if they come to us, we're going to forgive them. We're going to say, no, I ain't going to forgive you. No, when you come to repentance, God says, I'm going to forgive you. Notice, again, God says many people are going to lose their love. Not a few, but many. And this is a prophecy at the end of an age. It would be a real problem amongst God's people at the end of this age. Many will be defiled, God said, because of pride. Pride is a grievous sin. And the merciful God we serve, He instituted it, the Passover, days of unleavened bread, to prioritize our life. He instituted the Ordinance of Humility to make sure we also prioritize sin, if I may say there's a prioritizing, but God certainly pointed pride out at the very beginning. I don't want to sound all gloom and doom either. A lot of people accuse me of that. But there is good news. There is great hope. God is a loving and merciful God. And He says, just simply humble yourselves. I'm here for you. If you repent of that pride, He's quick to forgive. He's waiting. But He will not break His own rules and laws. Draw near to Him. And He says, I will extend grace. But to the prideful, He says, I'm going to take it away. Think about that. Study that. We're doomed without grace. I don't care how good you think you are, how righteous you are. If God does not shine His grace on you and I, it's over with. Notice what God says here in verse 7. Cast all your care upon Him, for He cares for you. Notice He says, be sober, be vigilant. Because why? Your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same sufferings are experienced by our brotherhood in the world. What are the consequences if we do not remove sin? God makes it clear. The devil will consume us. A puffed up attitude is a favorite target, as I mentioned. And he will. It's not a matter if. He will devour us. I want to, at this time, look at the important warning message God gave to Cain in helping him to see his attitude towards sin. And this example, I think, I'll call it a poster child, if you will, of the meaning of the days of unleavened bread. Mr. Hill touched on it. I'm glad he didn't. He just skimmed through it. We're going to go a little bit deeper into it here. But it is a powerful warning message of sin and its consequences preserved for you and I through his dealings with Cain. Let's go to Genesis 4. Genesis 4. And we'll go go through 1 through 14. Now, Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I have acquired a man from the Lord. She then bore again, this time his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of the sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Now Abel also brought of the first of his flock and of their fat, and the Lord respected Abel and his offering. So as Mr. Hill talked about how important an offering is. It was very important to God. He takes notice of our offerings. Don't take our offering lightly, as you heard. But I find it interesting that the first murder was over what? An offering. As Mr. Hill said, it's not a competition, first of all, but it was here for them, for not for Abel, but for Cain. But it says, both Cain and Abel understood the requirements of giving an offering, or a proper one. Cain knew it because God expected something from his offering. He says, I didn't respect Abel's offering. I'm sorry, he respected Abel's offering, but he did not respect Cain's offering. Abel took the opportunity very seriously to give an offering. His attitude is one of obedience, one of faithfulness. He more than likely saw it as an incredible privilege and honor to give an offering to the great God. This example should remind us of the privilege and the absolute honor it is to give an offering to the great God. The problem with offerings are that some people don't realize or think it through whose presence they come into on an holy day. It is the same God that Moses and the children of Israel stood before when they came out of Egypt. He is here today. He's leading each and every one of us out of the land of Egypt, a type of sin, and he leads us with a mighty hand. He is here in power of his Spirit before his people, but please do not doubt what God is doing through his beloved people. Cain did not see God in the same light. He was pretty casual about his offering. On the other hand, it says Abel brought the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. Abel's offering, he didn't just go out there and pick some scrawny old ewe out of the herd and said, hey, this'll do. No, he saved the best. He probably put this animal well in advance, took it aside, maybe fenced it in, gave it special foods, special hay. Because it says the fat. This was not an afterthought with Abel. I want to give this offering. What is the best thing I can give God? That was his attitude. So he fattened it up. I envision Cain at the last minute realizing, oh man, I got to give an offering. I forgot all about that. It says because he was a tiller of the ground, I envision him strolling through his garden and say, okay, he picks a few fruits. It says fruit from the ground. Threw it maybe in a basket. Maybe he didn't even wash it and prepare it. He just, that's what I envision. I don't know exactly, God doesn't say, but I just envision this careless attitude that he has. And of course, it got him in a lot of trouble with other things. But God calls him out. says, I don't respect your offering, Cain. Notice verse 5, Genesis 4. But he did not respect Cain and his offering, and Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. So that the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your countenance fell? God is saying, you have no reason to be angry. I'm trying to help you. I'm showing you what the problem here is. Why is your countenance fell? It's been said the measure of character found in a person is how well they take correction. And that is so true. It's also said the measure of conversion can also be found in how well a person takes correction. What is the first reaction to a carnal human mind? Cain got angry with God. Why? Because he called him out. That must have stung. God said, why has your countenance fell? Countenance is a look or expression, demeanor, indication of mood. And maybe when God called out Cain, maybe Cain, he probably gritted his teeth. How dare you talk to me? Right? Isn't that what happens when people call you out? You go, who do you think you are? Maybe he clenched his fist. I don't know. But God brings out his countenance. Something was not right with him. God said, why is your countenance fell? It shows the level of carnality that Cain had. All the warning signs of sin were there in Cain's life. And God reveals the consequences here. Notice verse 6. This is, if you will, the poster child for today's unleavened bread. Very important verse you should highlight. And maybe put your name in there. This is to every one of us sitting here. Not only Cain. What did God say? If you do well, will you not be accepted? God says, look, just do the right thing. Of course I will accept you. You're my son, you're my daughter. Then he goes on, if you do not do well. Here comes the warning, here comes the consequences. If you do not do well, sin lies at the door. Its desire is for you. And if you are in the human flesh, you know that fight that goes on within, that struggle from within you and I. We're fleshly human beings. But he says its desire is for you. Now understand, he's talking about sin. It's very desirable, he says. Then he goes on, for you, it's desirable for you, but you should rule over it. There's the answer. You need to rule over it. Yes, it's there, but you have a choice. This is the deep meaning of the days unleavened bread. God clearly spells out the answers to why it is so vital to put sin out. Get it out, keep it away from us, because its desire will consume you. And notice it comes down to a choice. God tells Cain, it's your choice. I explained to you what sin is. I'm going to tell you what the consequences are. But you have a choice. And all of us sitting here have a choice to determine whether sin is going to rule over us this coming year. God said to Cain, sin lies at the door. The Hebrew word for lie is the same word as ancient Babylon word referring to an evil demon crouching at the door of a building to threaten the people inside. I find that fascinating. Satan's right there. That's what the Hebrew word means. Satan is right there. He's at that door. Don't open that door to sin, because if you do, this is what God is saying. Now you're dealing with Satan, the devil. I can't help you if you choose to go down that path. Satan is crouching. Come on out. Don't open the door to sin. Don't. We've seen the consequences. Horrifying. We open the door for the rulers of darkness. Let's go to Ephesians 6:12. Let's thoroughly understand what's involved with sin. It's more than just a choice. It's the consequences of that choice. Ephesians 6, verse 12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Didn't God just warn us here in verse 6? Its desires for you that you should rule over. Sin will lie at the door. Interesting, he uses a door. When you go down that path, it will open this door to Ephesians 6, verse 12. If we open the door and choose to do nothing, we open that door up to the rulers of this. That's who we're going up against when we do that. So do we begin to understand the gravity of the importance of the 7 days, 11 bread? Do we see the love of God for his people in keeping the 7 days? Do we see the warning signs that God gives us over and over again? Don't do that. You're going to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread for 7 days for me to help you to understand the dangers of sin. Satan's right there to pounce on us, just as he told Cain. Verse 8, now Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother, and he killed him. Again, striking illustration of the awful consequences of Cain's choice to ignore sin. It caused the life of another human being. Verse 9, then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel your brother? And he said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? One sin always leads to another, to another. Cain here tells an outright lie. When God asks him where his brother is, you don't think God knew that. And you see that he's filled at this point with callousness, indifference, the love waxed cold. Verse 10, and he said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me in the ground. So now you are cursed from the earth, and when he has opened his mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand, when you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond you shall be on the earth. And Cain said to the Lord, notice his reaction. The consequences, God tells him the consequences of his actions. Notice what he says. He just killed his brother. And this is what he says. Lost my place here. Oh, and Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Here's that pity party again. Oh, look at you doing, God. That's harsh. Surely you have driven me out of this day from the face of the ground. I shall be hidden from your face. As if he really cared that he was hidden from his face. But it was again the pity party. Look what you're doing. I won't be around. You'll be out of my life. Well, if God would have, if he wanted God in his life, the offering would have reflected that. In his actions when sin was called out, he would have made a choice not to sin, but he chose that way of life. But now, oh, woe is me. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth, and it will happen that anyone who finds me will kill me. And we'll stop the story there, but we see that he was confronted with his crime and the curse. And that's exactly how the carnal mind responds. My punishment is greater than I can bear. his sin was virtually uninterrupted. He was angry. He was jealous, deception, murder, all because he didn't heed God's warning. God tried to tell him where this was all going to go. If you go down this path, Satan will be there to help you. But it's a very important lesson for us to take from this day forward. Now I want to, I got to watch my time here. We've got to end a little early today. I want to talk about the warning signs of sin and its consequences on a national and global scale. Let's go to Romans 1:18 through 32. God talks about the wrath of the unrighteous here. It is an absolute warning sign, actually to us and the world, that it does affect us, as we'll see, in a very important way. So Romans 1:18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes have been clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds, and the four-footed animals, and creeping things. Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanliness in the lusts of their heart, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason God gave them up to vile passions. For even the women exchange the natural use of what is against nature. Likewise also men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust for one another, men with men, committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error, which is due. And even as they did not like to obtain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceitful, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, and unthankful. When man abandons God, a sequence of warning signs become evident, and they begin to materialize in a society. And we have been witness to many of these signs, warning signs that we've abandoned God. Number one, become obsessed with pornographics. The world becomes overrun with it. The internet is filled with billions of internet sites on pornography. It has become obsessed with sex, obsessed with fornication, obsessed with adultery, and every kind of sexual deviance. Number two, sign that appears when they turn their backs on God, they abandon him. First, we had the sexual revolution of the 60s, 70s, and then it moved into the homosexual revolution. And we're living today in those very conditions. We're right there again, just as Sodom and Gomorrah. I was going to go back and read Sodom and Gomorrah, just to remind us how bad it will get, and is, if not already here. But we're in those conditions we find ourselves now at the end of an age. Number three, sign that man has abandoned their God. Depraved or debased mind appears. Boy, have we seen that. It means corrupt. It means perverted, cause distortion or lowering of character. You know, there can't be a lowering. If you've ever seen a lowering of character, look at our leaders today. How can they stoop to these levels? There is no character anymore in this nation. They are perverted, and they've distorted the truth. Look at the media. And that couldn't be a better way to describe what sin has done to Israelitish nations. Only a depraved mind would kill unborn babies. You know, what did he say to Cain? Abel's blood speaks from the ground. This nation and the nations of the world, it's blood-soaked bodies of the innocent unborn murder on a massive scale, worldwide. Number 4, warning sign, man has abandoned God. They begin to hate God on a global scale. And that is a sequence of what happens when God is thrown out. The more they embrace evil, sinful lifestyles, the greater the hatred for God. And we know from prophecy that will involve us eventually. We're going to be hated by all nations for His sake. Christ was hated. We're going to receive the brunt of that hatred soon. Hopefully we won't be here for the full brunt of it. So we see the consequences for this lifestyle. Notice verse 32. Who, knowing the righteousness judgments of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. You know, we must not sit here and think that, well, that's the world, it affects them. No, all the sins that I read about, don't think we're not immune to that. We are weak human beings. It does affect us. That's why we have the 7 days of unleavened bread. 7 days, God warns us, stay out of it. The consequences are greater than you can bear. You know, our society prides itself on tolerance and acceptance. And the things of God, they call it an abomination, don't they? When anyone speaks out against these abominations, these sins, it's called what? Hate speech. What does God say about those who agree with these horrible things? 32, let's read it again. Who, knowing the righteous judgments of God, and those who practice such things are deserving of death. To shut up and say nothing would amount to nothing more than agreeing with them. Why do I say that? Actually, in my mind, that would be hate speech. We don't love, yes, of course we love these people. To not warn them would be deserving of death, God said. Why is the Ezekiel warning so important to God? So much so that it comes with a warning sign of consequences if we ignore it or don't take it seriously. He said if we ignore it, that blood's on our heads. Why is it such an important message in God's eyes? Because it is a message of love. It's not a message of hate speech. It's a message of love from our Creator. Loves these people so much. It is a message of hope, a message of deliverance to the people trapped in the slavery of these sins, the sexual deviance, perverse things that dominate their lives, and the consequences. We see it all over. Do we cry and sigh for what we see? If we do, we'll understand that Ezekiel's warning message is a love speech, not a hate speech. I want us to take note of God's love and concern for the sinner of this world, and the hope that he has for them. Ezekiel 33, 1 through 12. And this does affect us in a very profound way. Ezekiel 33, 1 through 12. Again, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, speak to children of thy people, and say to them, when I bring the sword upon the land, if the people of the land take a man of their coast and set him for a watchman, if when he sees the sword come upon the land, he blows the trumpet and warns the people, then whoever heeds the sound of the trumpet and takes not warning, the sword comes and takes him away, his blood shall be upon his own head. Verse 5, he heard the sound of the trumpet and took not warning, his blood, I read that, but he that takes warning shall deliver his soul. But if the watchman sees the sword come and blows not the trumpet, then the people be not warned. If the sword comes and takes any person from among them, he is taken away in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at the watchman's hand. So though, Son of man, I have set thee as a watchman unto the house of Israel, therefore you shall take heed to the word of my mouth. This is the warning sign, a warning from God himself. You're to warn them for me. When I say to the wicked, O wicked man, you shall surely die if you do not speak to warn the wicked from his ways, that the wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will be required at your hand. Nevertheless, if you warn the wicked of their way and they turn from it, if he does not turn from his ways, he shall die in his iniquity, but you have delivered your soul. Therefore, O house of men, speak to the house of Israel. Therefore, O house of men, speak to the house of Israel, that you speak, saying, if our transgressions and our sins be upon us, and we pine away in them, should we then live? Say to them, as I live, says the Lord God, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from their way and live. Turn you from your evil ways. For why will you die, O house of Israel? Is this love speech that I'm hearing? Absolutely. This comes from a loving God. And there's the message we must give. Verse 12, therefore, Son of man, say to the children of people, the righteousness of the righteous shall not deliver him in the day of his transgressions. As for the wickedness of the wicked, he shall not fall, therefore, there by the day that he turns from his wickedness. Neither shall the righteous be able to live for his righteousness in the day that he sins. You know, in God's eyes, to be quiet and say nothing is truly to hate them, and it's deserving of death. That's pretty profound. You know, if we have that Philadelphian love that God has, we will boldly stand in the gap. We will be a mouthpiece for God. We really have no choice. He said, do it, we must do it. But it's not going to be easy, brethren. We're going to be hated when that love speech is proclaimed. But I understand, as you do, that God will have to open the door. And if he opens the door, we better be ready. If we truly love our brothers and sisters. In closing, I'd like to turn to one last warning sign of sin and its consequences, one that speaks to you and I in a very personal way from our Creator God. Let's go to Revelation 18:4. We got to end a little earlier today because we have to do a transfer here with Mr. Scarborough for the afternoon sermon. So Revelation 18:4. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out over my people, lest you share in their sins, lest you receive of her plagues. For her sins have reached to heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. How close are we? We're very close to this happening. Rendering to her just as she rendered to you, and repay her double according to her works. In the cup which she has mixed doubled for her. In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure gave her torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, I said, as a queen, I am no widow, and will not see sorrow. God says, I got a different plan. You can think that all you want to. Therefore, her plague will come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she will utterly be burned with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judges her. Now, God said, come out of her, my people. We have a choice. Very clear warning here from God. And the consequences, pictured by the days on the bread. We all have a choice to make this coming year. Will we continue to walk out of sin, headed toward the kingdom of God? In doing so, we will turn our back. We will come out of this world. And God certainly said he would lead us out with a high hand if we will continue to reach out to him in humility. Never forget how the year starts out. In humility. That should flash throughout this coming year. Humility, humility. Foot washing. But we need to grab onto God. We need to cling to him as he says. He is our rock. Hopefully he is. But he wants us to succeed at all costs. He asked us to do some things. Not going to be pleasant. But it should be a great honor to step in when God opens that door to warn the rest of the world what's coming. So I want to, again, leave you with a very comforting and loving warning message. Again, I want to repeat it, that God gave to Cain, and he gave it to us as sure as we're sitting here today. His voice echoes this very same clear warning. If you do well, will you be accepted? Good question. Of course you will. We all know that. God's there for us. And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door. Will you open that door, or will you keep it shut this following year? Pictured by the days of leavened bread. Its desire is for us, God's warning us, sin can be very desiring. Just don't open the door. And then he said it comes down to a choice. But you should rule over it. We have a choice. Every one of us have a choice to rule over sin. And we have the help. We have God's help. We have his Holy Spirit. He's given us all the tools to rule over sin. But we control the door. We have a choice. Keep it closed. Stay away from sin. Get it out of our lives. Keep it out this coming year. But the consequences of opening that door, God said it would bring on great evil and consequences that follow that evil. So the choice is ours. We can rule over it. We can choose to open the door. But that is the lesson. The days of unleavened bread. God gave us 7 days to think about sin and what to do about it. He warns us of the consequences. Let's keep the door closed. Let's go forward on our knees, humbling ourselves before God. And God will bless us this coming year as never before. And we need those blessings as never before. And ask God to open the door that you and I, that we, the people he's drawn out, can have the opportunity to warn the rest of the world in that Philadelphian love.
For more information, go to our website at cogassembly.org. Copyright 2022, Church of God Assembly. All rights reserved.